Today, we're diving into a global story of defiance. You see, as these massive industrial empires started stretching their reach across the world, they didn't just find empty land. Nope. They found people, cultures, and a resistance that was fierce, creative, and totally relentless. Let's get into this epic confrontation. This isn't just some old physics riddle. It's really the central question of the 19th century. On one side, you have the seemingly unstoppable force of industrial imperialism, and on the other, well, that's the immovable object, the will of people all over the world to protect their lands, their cultures, and their very existence. For a good century and a half, the main story you'd hear was all about expansion and conquest. But here's the thing, that's only half the story. The other half, the response, is this incredible, interconnected tale of rebellion, resilience, and yeah, even the birth of brand new identities. So, how did all this resistance get started? Well, first up, we've got the creation of new states. People started forging these modern national identities directly from the fragments of old, crumbling empires. Okay, so picture the Balkans in the 1800s. The Ottoman Empire, which had been this huge powerhouse, was starting to lose its grip. This created a massive power vacuum, and something new rushed in to fill it. This potent idea spreading from Western Europe called nationalism. The desire for people to rule themselves was really taking hold. And once that ball started rolling, man, it picked up speed fast. Serbia took a huge first step in 1815. Then you have Greece winning its freedom in 1832. This whole wave just built and built until 1878 when the Treaty of Berlin made it official, redrawing the map and recognizing a whole slate of new independent nations. But building a new nation wasn't the only way to resist. For a lot of people, it meant a direct, armed struggle, usually after every other possible option had been tried and had failed. The story of the Cherokee Nation is just so tragic because of this contrast. I mean, they tried to play by the rules. They created a constitution modeled on the U.S. itself. They adopted American customs. They took their fight for their land to the Supreme Court. But when gold was discovered on their land, suddenly all those rules went out the window, and the response was the Indian Removal Act. And this number, it just drives home the brutal human cost of that policy. Around 4,000 Cherokee men, women, and children died on that forced march west. It's a journey that became known, for good reason, as the Trail of Tears. Now let's jump over to South America, where a similar story of defiance played out, but with this really crucial twist. Tupac Amaru II led this massive rebellion against Spanish rule. Militarily, it failed, and he was executed for it. But his story didn't end there. His defiance became this incredibly powerful symbol, a rallying cry, that helped fuel the successful independence movements that came later. Halfway across the world in India, a completely different kind of spark lit an absolute firestorm. The immediate trigger for the huge Indian rebellion of 1857 came down to these rifle cartridges. You see, forcing Hindu and Muslim soldiers to bite casings greased with cow and pig fat was a deep, profound religious insult. It was the last straw that unleashed decades of pent-up anger against the British East India Company. The consequences of that rebellion were absolutely transformative. Before, you had the British ruling through a corporation, and the old Mughal Empire still technically existed. But after the rebellion was crushed, the British crown took complete control. The Mughal dynasty was just swept away, and the British Raj began. It fundamentally changed the game for colonial rule in India, forever. And the story was no different in Africa, where armed resistance to European encroachment was incredibly widespread and unbelievably determined. From southern Africa all the way to West Africa, you had these formidable leaders and kingdoms rising up to defend their sovereignty. And the scale of this resistance was just immense. You have the Zulu kingdom handing the technologically superior British army a stunning defeat. You've got Samori Touré in West Africa fighting this brilliant guerrilla war against the French for more than a decade. And in Sudan, the Mahdist revolt actually succeeded for a time in driving the British and Egyptians out. This was organized, strategic, and incredibly powerful military opposition. But resistance wasn't always fought with guns and armies. Sometimes the fight was a spiritual one, a war for cultural survival, for the very soul of a people. So in North America, as Native peoples were facing this just overwhelming pressure, a new spiritual movement called the Go Stance emerged. Its goals were totally peaceful and restorative. It was a prophecy of hope, this vision that their ancestors and the buffalo would return and their traditional way of life would be reborn. But, and this is the heartbreaking part, the US government didn't see a peaceful religion. They saw the beginnings of a war. This fatal misunderstanding, seeing a spiritual revival as a military threat, set the stage for an absolutely horrific tragedy. That fear led directly to the Wounded Knee Massacre. U.S. troops surrounded a group of Lakota Sioux, and they killed hundreds of them, most of whom were unarmed women and children. It was just a brutal, horrific end to a movement that was all about peace and hope. And tragically, this wasn't an isolated event. Half a world away, another spiritual movement had an equally catastrophic outcome. Driven by a prophecy, the Xhosa people of South Africa destroyed their own wealth, their cattle, their crops, as this ultimate act of faith. They believed this incredible sacrifice would resurrect their ancestors and expel the Europeans. Instead, it just led to a devastating famine. So you might be thinking, if so many of these rebellions were crushed, what was the point? Did they all just fail? Well, not in the long run. They were planting the seeds for the future. When you look closely, you start to see this clear historical pattern. First, the initial military rebellions are often put down, but that shared struggle creates a new unified identity against a common enemy. And that identity fuels organized political movements, which ultimately lay the groundwork for the successful independence campaigns of the 20th century. India is the perfect example of this process in action. The 1857 rebellion is crushed, right? But in its place, the British Raj creates one clear opponent for all of India. Then a new generation of Indians, many of them educated in British schools, starts to organize. And by 1885, they form the Indian National Congress, the very organization that would one day lead India to freedom. That defeated rebellion was actually a necessary first step. So, as we wrap this up, think about this. The world map we see today wasn't just inevitable, it was shaped by these struggles. This history isn't just about the past. It's the story of how so many modern nations literally fought their way into existence. They were born from the ashes of rebellions that may have been defeated at the time, but were never, ever truly forgotten.